activities that we get to do after. So a special thanks to you veterans. Thank you very, very much for all that you do. So, round of applause. So I'd like to, just open a dialogue with you. Get some from your students here. Just, yes, ma'am. See, you're the brave one, the first one to ask the question.
I was wondering, we were talking a lot about the healthcare events that occurred
Sure.
Saturday, and I was wondering if you have seen the documentary Sicko and how you feel about it.
I haven't seen the movie Sicko or the documentary or what's the guy's name? Michael. Yeah, how can I forget Michael? Yeah, I haven't seen it yet. It's healthcare is a very personal to everyone, and that's why it's been such a difficult debate. When we started the debate, we looked at the debate based upon two objectives, and having the opportunity to sit many times with the president, especially being one of the leaders of the Blue Dog Caucus and being elected to represent our caucus. I get a lot of meetings, obviously with House leadership, with Senate. We get to have a lot in that dialogue. And one of the main objectives, there was two really main objectives. The first objective was to get everyone insured who doesn't have insurance. To make sure that people are insured and they have quality health care and accessibility and affordability. The second objective was to lower the overall cost of health care in this country. Those were the two main objectives, really. There are obviously multiple A's, B's, and C's underneath each one of the different main topics. But to truly make sure that we get access to people, whether it be way of insurance or way of access, and then obviously curb the health care cost. We're at 17% of GDP. That's more than any other country in the world spends on health care. So those were the two main objectives. So going through this process, at sometimes you kind of focus on one and forget the other. And a little bit is what we did on the House bill. And of course it changed, and there was some significant changes in the House bill. There were some areas that I so strongly favor. Portability. If you go from one job to another, you can take your health insurance with you. The non-drop clause, just because if you get a type of illness or a sickness that they can't just arbitrarily drop you, and I think that's part of the whole Sicko, that how some of these examples, and the other is like the pre-existing conditions. Those are some main ideas, and those are some really good at the top of the list when it comes to the reform that we need, and I'm all in favor of our reform. The other side of it was our cost. How will we lower the healthcare costs, that we don't turn 17% of GDP into 25% of GDP in a short time period. And when the Congressional Budget Office came back with the House bill, first of all, the president said, look, I want a bill under what amount? $900 billion. He said, I want a bill under $900 billion. House bill didn't do that. The other objective, he says, I want one that bends the cost curve. And to kind of explain the cost curve is the first 10 years, obviously you're going to put money into a program because some of the things that are being done in the program cost money because it's a new type of program. So it's going to cost money. But then after time, based upon the transformation or the improvements made in healthcare delivery, those costs obviously continue to go down over time. The House bill didn't do that. And this is straight from the Congressional Budget Office, who is not Democrat, Republican, conservative, liberal. They are composed of bodies of actuarial people and attorneys and accountants and that actually study the legislation. And the third thing was being deficit neutral. And there was, although it was deficit neutral, it certainly did a tremendous amount of taking money from, like Medicare, $500 billion from Medicare. So there were some problems and some issues, and then the other was based upon just taxation. Another big problem is how many of you ever purchased a vehicle? I mean, used, new, okay. Imagine this. Imagine when you purchased that vehicle, you went and put it in your garage and parked it. And you had to pay on it for 2 years in order to use it. That's what happened in this health care bill. For the first 2 years, and it was introduced, after it passes, the taxes go into place, but the services aren't provided for. And I personally feel at this time, we got to do everything we possibly can to make sure that people who are uninsured and who has been dropped and who has pre-existing conditions has health care immediately, as quickly as we possibly can. I mean, not to get political, and I know there's Democrats and Republicans alike in here, but I mean, the Bush administration did that in Iraq, didn't they? As a matter of fact, they have universal health care in Iraq that our federal dollars pay for under the Bush administration. Now think about that. So if they get sick, they go and they get free health care. So we've got to make changes in our country to make sure that the people who are suffering and who don't have access and who can't afford it actually has, right here in the U.S., affordability. That we don't look at the long-term impact that we bankrupt our country by year 2030. So we've got some issues when it comes to the delivery system, but the cost is so enormous when it comes to the big scope of how much we're spending on it. Yes, sir.
Yes, I'm a professor here at the university, and taking into consideration all the things you just said about the cost control measures to healthcare, I was wondering if you could share with us what leadership you showed in terms of offering amendments or separate legislation addressing controlling costs in healthcare.
What we did is we were very engaged when it comes to the Blue Dog Caucus. We were very engaged in some of the cost control containments. The IMAC is a perfect example of some areas that we felt like could have some huge impacts. Basically, and we've had an example of this in our last when Social Security Administration wasn't increasing the funding to our seniors, but Medicare premiums were going up. So there was a disproportionately that our seniors are going to be adversely impacted. Well, members of Congress will never vote against our seniors. You're not going to vote against your seniors. That is a block of constituents that always vote. Okay. So when that happens, if it was $500 or $5,000, you're going to do whatever's the best thing for our seniors. And we need to do everything that we can to make sure our seniors have both provided the medical service and Social Security to be able to provide for them. What happens is, if we don't have someone overseeing members of Congress, then those numbers will only kind of escalate. It's very similar to the SGR, which is the doc fix. If we don't have someone start regulating that, basically, Medicare says that they're going to drop the percentage of the doc's benefits back that they get. In other words, when you go in as a Medicare patient, it was some $200 billion. So they call it SGR, the doc fix. Well, members of Congress don't vote against the docs because they're providing service for who? Your constituents who need service. And if they don't see any more Medicare patients, then we have areas, Graham County, you know, for an example, or other areas that they're not going to take any more Medicare patients if you don't increase the fees that goes to the docs. So you have this impacts along the way. So a MedPAC, or a group that would be an outside, nonpartisan group that would oversee some of these regulations and to be able to make some of these tough decisions that, to be quite frank, members of Congress would vote against or vote for, depending upon how the legislation is written. That's one area in which we can significantly drop the amount of health care.
So was this introduced on the floor?
No, it wasn't. As you well know, that there was only one amendment. The Stupak amendment was the only amendment that was offered on the House floor. Most of the negotiation was done all with House leadership. And there was a lot of things that were changed and altered, but the Stupak amendment, which is basically the Hyde amendment, the abortion amendment, was the only rule made in order, which through, the legislation, you know ahead of time what's going to be offered, what's going to be allowed, and what's not going to be allowed. So it wasn't an open process. Yes, sir.
Well, I have to